and welcome to the Bronx Journal. I'm Charles Reynoso. From his tough childhood growing up in the Bronx projects to his time as a daily news reporter, Paul LaRosa has gathered enough unique life experiences to write a fascinating book. And he has. It's called Leaving Story Avenue. Paul, it's truly a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Charles. Nice to be here.
Now, I want to jump in just with the title of that book, Leaving Story Avenue. Where did you get that?
Well, I grew up on Story Avenue in the Monroe projects, and I thought, after that, I became a newspaper reporter, and then now I work for CBS News. So my whole life is really about stories. I mean, I wrote stories for the news, I produced hours for CBS News, and I thought, well, I grew up on Story Avenue, and I became a storyteller. So it seemed like it made perfect sense, poetic.
So you mentioned the projects. In the Bronx. What was that like growing up there?
Well, it was two faces of the projects, I mean, I moved into Monroe in '61 when it opened, and I got to tell you that for the first, maybe 8 years or so, it was really idyllic. I mean, I had a great childhood for about 8 years or so. The projects had just opened. We moved in when they were still building them, even as we lived there, and nobody had previous friends. There were no cliques. Every kid just came down, sat on the benches, played in the playgrounds, and we all became friends with each other. So we had so many friends. I mean, there were like 20, 25, 30 people we always hung around with on the benches, and it was great. I mean, we didn't. Nothing was organized. We came down and we played softball games. We had enough for 10 guys on each side and a bench. And it wasn't organized by any adults. We organized it. We could play basketball whenever we wanted to. Off the Barrel is a game we invented. So it really was idyllic for a long time. And then the projects changed. They turned. I mean, drugs came into vogue. Gangs kind of took over. It became more menacing. When I first moved in, you could walk in and out of the buildings no problem. By the time 8 years or so had gone by, there were security entrances, and you needed to call up if you didn't have a key. You needed the key to get in the front door, or you had to call up and say, "Hey, can you let me in? I'm downstairs." So things really kind of changed. There was urine in the elevator, there was graffiti all over, and it became like a more menacing place. I was mugged quite a bit when I was a kid, and there's pretty much nothing you can do except take it,
Wow. So already I can imagine the amount of experiences that you had just being there. Was it out of those experiences that you decided, I want to be a writer, or I want to work for the news? Like, when did that passion come up?
I'd say, when I was a kid, I read a lot, and I was always a big reader. And one of the things I always say to students is if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader. And don't tell me you don't read a lot if you want to be a writer, because you have to. You have to. And I really believe the smartest people I know are the people who read a lot. And so I did read a lot when I was a kid. I learned to read at an early age, and it made me want to write. I remember the first thing I ever tried to write was a James Bond book, because I had read most of the James Bond books, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to write my own James Bond book? So, I tried, and I kind of realized how hard it was, and, went by the wayside. But that gave me a taste, and when I went to Cardinal Hayes High School in the Bronx, I joined, I actually entered a short story writing contest in my freshman year, and I won $5. And that, that was the first paycheck, and I still have the envelope the $5 came in, but I spent the money. But so that was validation. Every kid needs validation that they're on the road to doing the right thing. And I think it's really important. Like, when you start getting validation in school or at home, it makes you want to try harder for whatever that is. So, I got that validation, and I joined the school newspaper, and I wrote a couple of stories. And, Jimi Hendrix died in those years, and I wrote an obit for Jimi Hendrix in the school newspaper. And, more and more I got into writing, and I loved it. I loved it. And that's how it sort of began.
Now, you mentioned the importance of reading. What were some of your favorite authors?
Well, I know the first paperback I bought ever was Frankenstein. And I can still see the cover, and I think it was 50 cents or something like that. But I've always liked J.D. Salinger. Catcher in the Rye was a big influence on me, in high school. But I remember authors that nobody remembers anymore, like O.E. Rolvog, Giants in the Earth, which I thought was a great epic book. Pearl S. Buck. I read all the kind of classic books when I was a kid, and it was, Hayes gave me a great education. I mean, if you read the book, you'll see that there were certain problems in Hayes. The priest brothers would hit me, would hit other kids. I mean, and that's just the way it was back then. But it also gave us a very solid foundation in education. One of the reasons I wanted to write the book and a memoir is to preserve these memories, because things are so different now. I mean, you would never, first of all, a priest or any teacher would never slap a kid as hard as he possibly could, which happened to me. And most kids wouldn't go home and not say a word to their parents about it either, which happened to me. These days, they would have hauled that guy in on criminal charges, But I wanted people to see how things have changed and how, is that a memory worth preserving? Well, I think, it happened. All those stories are interesting because, they really happened, and it was a different time. It was a different time and place, New York.
So it's a giant leap from the projects and Cardinal Hayes to the Daily News. Mm-hmm. Now, I just need to know, what is the lobster shift, and how did that get you the cover and the Lenin story?
Well, the lobster shift is a shift you really don't want to be on. It's midnight to 8 a.m. in the morning. Your life is sort of turned upside down. You're always tired. It's not a great experience generally, but you get ready to go to work around 11 o'clock. And I was getting ready to go to work one night, and I got a call, that John Lennon had just been shot and was probably dead. At that point, people didn't know. So I got in my car, and I raced as fast as I could to get to the Dakota Apartments on 72nd Street. And, I got there pretty quickly, within 20 or 30 minutes of when I was told. And there were a couple of dozen, fans of Lenin milling around the entrance. And little by little, people brought guitars and started singing "All You Need Is Love" and all the other Beatles songs. And the block kept filling up, and it was filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of people by the morning. And I was determined not to leave. I went around and interviewed I was a huge Beatles fan, and it was devastating to me that this happened. But I went around, I interviewed everybody and took notes, and by morning I was determined to no sleep or anything, just go back to the office and write the story for the afternoon paper, which is what I did. And that was the front page story, Lenin getting killed. And it was a devastating story, but I wanted the readers to know that it wasn't written just by some hack writer, that it was written by a guy who loved the Beatles and grew up with them. So it was, that's what the lobster shift is. It was great for me in that one instance. It generally is not a place you want to be. It's not a punishment, but it's newspapers are 24/7, and that's in a way what I loved about them. I could go in there any time of day and know people. Any time of day and know people. It's pretty remarkable. I had some great years at the News.
Now, I have to know, what does it feel to have the paper that you worked for now run a story on you and your memoirs?
Great. It's weird too. Honestly, it is a little weird to open the paper and see a story about myself. About myself writing about the paper. And because this memoir, Leaving Story Avenue, is sort of a combination of the years I grew up in the projects and also the years I worked, the first 5 or so years I worked at the Daily News. When I went from being a copy boy to being a reporter. And those years coincided. They were 1975 to 1983. Those were dramatic years in New York City. You're too young to remember, but the city was near bankruptcy. John Lennon got killed. There were the blackout riots. I mean, there was the Son of Sam, terror reign. Ed Koch got elected. The Yankees won the World Series. I mean, on and on it went. Those were super dramatic years. It was a great place to have a front seat on life, being a reporter for the Daily News.
So it's clear that you are no stranger to hard-hitting stories, amazing tales. Tell me about the 9/11 documentary that you are a part of.
Right. So I helped produce this pretty well-known CBS News documentary called 9/11, and it ran exactly 6 months after the event itself. And what it was a couple of French brothers, the Nordet brothers, happened to be filming a rookie firefighter who they were doing a documentary about a rookie firefighter, and he happened to be in the house that was closest to the World Trade Center, his firehouse. And nobody wanted to buy the documentary. I mean, they couldn't sell it to anyone. But, you know, they were still shooting it and trying to figure it out. And then 9/11 happened. And they were in one of the towers when it collapsed. And you see everything turn dark around them. And, you know, it was the most dramatic video you could ever imagine. And they came to CBS to ask us to put it together. And I happened to be on the team that helped produce that 2-hour special, which when it ran was seen by 40 million people. I mean, that was such a big deal when it ran. You know, everybody had their TV sets tuned to it. And I'm lucky enough to have been a part of the team that put it together. It won an Emmy. There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's not the only one. I think it's 2 Emmys that you have under your belt. That has to be an amazing experience. How did you feel when they first told you, hey, by the way, you just won an Emmy?
Well, it's funny. The Emmy for 9/11 was a primetime Emmy. So we had to the team went to Los Angeles, and we actually walked. It wasn't the exact night as the regular Emmys. There's a night when there's like the craft Emmys, and then there's the big movie star Emmys. So we were in the craft Emmys, but you walk a red carpet. It's still in the same auditorium as the regular Emmys, and a lot of stars are there introducing the categories and everything. And you wear a tuxedo, and I got to tell you, it was really boring for most of the night because we were nominated. 9/11 was nominated in about 8 categories, and we lost in the first 7. And and you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, this is I came all the way to LA and it's hot in this tuxedo, and then for the biggest category of them all, like I forget the exact category, it was like the best documentary on television last year or something like that. They announced that we had won. And it was like a huge adrenaline rush. It was like, yes! And we all ran up on stage and went backstage, and there were like a million Emmys hanging around. They said, here, take one. And I said, great. And I took one. And of course, that was after 9/11. And I was thinking, how am I going to get this home on the plane? Because it's really sharp. The wings of the Emmy. And you could like hit somebody with it and kill them. And, so somehow I guess I packed it in my bag and they let it go through.
They made an exception for the Emmy.
Yeah, that's what I thought of back then.
Now, clearly, there are a ton of amazing stories that we all want to read about. How can we pick up your book?
Well, it's on sale online everywhere. That's what I tell people. It's easiest to find online. Some bookstores have it, but you have to ask for it generally. But if you go to, parkslopepublishing.com, which is the boutique agency that published it, if you go to paullarosa.com, which is my website and blog, you can buy it there. You can go to Amazon, you can go to Barnes & Nobles, Apple Store. It's available as a trade paperback and an ebook across all the formats. So it's out there, ladies and gentlemen.